I accepted the invitation because it said peace. A quiet dinner. No arguments. When I hugged my brother, his hand brushed my bag. I felt the weight before I saw it. An envelope, stiff, deliberate. I didn't open it. I didn't look at him. I finished my water and slipped it into his jacket pocket when he stood. No one noticed. Then the doorbell rang. Blue lights washed the windows. My father's smile collapsed. In that instant, I understood the dinner wasn't reconciliation. It was preparation. And silence was the only move that kept me clean. That choice changed everything. The restaurant was my mother's choice. Neutral. Familiar. Safe enough to signal good intentions. She greeted me with both hands on my shoulders and said we were moving forward. My father nodded like a deal had already been signed. My brother smiled too quickly. He kept his jacket on even though the room was warm. We sat. Menus opened. Small talk filled the gaps. My mother asked about work without listening to the answer. My father talked about weather and traffic, the way he did when he wanted control without discussion. The word peace kept coming up. I noticed how often my brother checked his phone. How his knee bounced under the table. How he leaned in when the waiter passed, as if waiting for a cue. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't ask why this dinner existed now, after months of silence. I watched. When I stood to use the restroom, my brother stood too. He brushed past me and his hand dipped into my bag with practiced ease. Not clumsy. Intentional. I felt the envelope settle at the bottom. I didn't react. I washed my hands. Looked at my face. Told myself not to panic. The trick with moments like this is to move slowly enough that no one suspects fear. Back at the table, I ordered water. I listened while my parents spoke about family and forgiveness. My brother laughed at a joke that didn't land. The envelope stayed where it was. When my brother stood to answer a call, I stood with him. I reached into my bag, slid the envelope out, and placed it into his jacket pocket as if returning a wallet. He didn't notice. That told me everything. The doorbell rang minutes later. 2 officers stepped in. Calm. Professional. Asking for my brother by name. My father froze, color draining from his face. My mother asked what this was about. Her voice cracked on the last word. They asked my brother to stand. He did, confused, reaching for his jacket. The envelope fell to the floor. The officers picked it up without ceremony. They asked him if it belonged to him. He looked at my father. My father looked away. I sat still. The explanation came out in pieces. A dispute. An attempt to shift responsibility. A belief that proximity could solve consequences. The officers were polite. Firm. They asked questions I didn't answer. I was thanked for my cooperation even though I hadn't said a word. Outside, blue lights reflected off the glass. Inside, my mother cried quietly. My father stared at the table like it might explain him. My brother was escorted out without a scene. No one apologized to me. Later, my father asked why I hadn't warned him. He said family handles things privately. I told him I had handled it privately. By not taking what wasn't mine. That was the moment the tone changed. They didn't argue facts. They argued loyalty. They said peace meant protection. I said peace meant honesty. I paid my share and stood. As I left, I realized the dinner had never been about reconciliation. It was about testing whether I would carry something dangerous to keep the image intact. I chose silence instead. And that choice moved the weight to where it belonged. The days after the dinner passed in a strange calm. No calls from my parents. No messages asking if I was okay. The silence wasn't concern. It was calculation. They were deciding how to frame what happened without including me in the story. I returned to work and kept my routine unchanged. Emails. Meetings. Deadlines. The normal structure helped me think clearly. I noticed how easily life continued when I didn't rush to explain myself. My father finally called 3 days later. He didn't ask how I was. He asked what I'd seen. I told him exactly what I saw. An envelope placed in my bag. A plan that assumed I wouldn't notice. A belief that I would carry it anyway. He said my brother was desperate. He said family protects family. He said the police didn't need to be involved. I reminded him that I didn't call them. That ended the conversation. My mother texted that night. She said she felt betrayed. Not by my brother. By me. She said I could have warned her. She said peace meant covering mistakes quietly. I read the message once and didn't reply. That was when the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every crisis in our family had followed the same shape. My brother acted. My parents minimized. I absorbed the risk. When things went wrong, loyalty was measured by how much I carried. This time, I hadn't carried anything. Relatives started reaching out with careful questions. Was everything okay? Had there been a misunderstanding? I answered politely and briefly. I didn't give details. I didn't defend myself. I let the facts exist without narration. My brother called from a number I didn't recognize. He sounded angry first, then scared. He said I'd ruined everything. He said I should have warned him. He said I knew how our parents were. I told him I did know. That was why I didn't take the envelope. He hung up. What surprised me most was how quickly the family narrative shifted once I stayed quiet. Stories lost momentum without my reaction. Accusations softened when no one argued back. Silence made room for reality. My parents stopped asking me to come over. Not out of respect. Out of uncertainty. They didn't know where I stood anymore. That distance felt unfamiliar but steady. I realized I had always been the buffer. The one who explained, smoothed, carried. Without me, consequences moved directly to their source. I wasn't being punished. I was being excluded from damage control. That clarity changed something permanent inside me. I stopped waiting for the next request. Stopped preparing explanations in advance. Stopped rehearsing apologies I hadn't earned. Peace, I learned, isn't achieved by hiding problems. It's achieved by refusing to carry what isn't yours. And once I understood that, the silence around me felt earned, not lonely. Type continue for part 3. The boundary was crossed a week later. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, which made it unmistakable. My parents asked me to come over. Not to talk. To pick up a few things I'd left behind. That phrasing mattered. It assumed access. It assumed familiarity hadn't changed. When I arrived, my brother wasn't there. The house felt staged. Clean in a way it hadn't been before. My mother moved carefully, like every step had been rehearsed. My father sat at the table, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. They told me my brother needed help. Legal help. Emotional help. They said he was under pressure and had made a mistake. They said families don't abandon their own when things get hard. I listened without interrupting. Then my father slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents. Statements. A summary written in my brother's handwriting. It framed the envelope as a misunderstanding. A mix-up. It suggested that I'd panicked and overreacted. At the bottom was a blank line. They wanted my signature. Not to lie outright. Just to soften the truth. My mother said it would help things move faster. She said it would keep the situation contained. She said the police didn't need more information. I looked at the paper. I noticed how carefully it avoided details. How it placed responsibility nowhere specific. How it relied on my cooperation to complete the picture. That was the boundary. Not the envelope. Not the arrest. This. They were asking me to rewrite reality so everyone else could stay comfortable. I closed the folder and slid it back. I said I wouldn't sign anything. My father's voice changed. He said I was being stubborn. My mother said I was holding a grudge. They said I didn't understand how serious things were. I said I understood perfectly. I stood up to leave. My mother followed me to the door and said something she'd never said out loud before. She said I always made things harder by insisting on fairness. She said my brother needed protection more than I needed truth. I didn't answer her. Outside, I sat in my car and felt something detach cleanly. Not pain. Recognition. I realized that every time I'd been told to keep the peace, what they meant was absorb the risk. Every time they spoke about unity, they meant obedience. I didn't go back. That night, I organized my records. Messages. Dates. Screenshots. I didn't send them anywhere. I didn't threaten anyone. I just kept them. For myself. The next morning, my parents left a voicemail asking me to reconsider. The tone was softer. More careful. They said they were worried about the family's reputation. That confirmed it. This had never been about me. Or my brother's mistake. Or even the law. It was about appearances. And I was done protecting them. I stopped responding after that. Not angrily. Not defensively. I simply stopped. Whatever happened next would happen without my signature, my silence, or my cooperation. And that was the first real peace I'd felt in years. The consequences unfolded without confrontation. They always do when no one is willing to carry the weight anymore. My parents stopped calling after I didn't respond to the voicemail. Not because they understood, but because they ran out of angles. Without my signature, the story couldn't be smoothed. Without my cooperation, the plan stalled. The legal process moved forward on its own timeline. Paperwork. Interviews. Follow-ups. No drama. Just procedure. My brother faced questions he couldn't redirect. My father attended meetings he couldn't control. My mother learned how quiet a house becomes when no one is left to manage outcomes. Relatives reached out cautiously. Some asked if there was anything they could do. Others hinted that families survive by closing ranks. I thanked them for checking in and said nothing else. Silence did the work for me. Weeks passed. Then months. The dinner stopped being a crisis and became a fact. A point people referenced carefully. My parents' reputation shifted in small ways. Invitations slowed. Conversations shortened. Not because of me, but because patterns tend to surface when no one hides them. I kept my distance. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. My relationship with my parents changed shape. We spoke occasionally. Polite. Measured. They avoided the subject entirely. They never asked me to fix anything again. I noticed something unexpected during that time. My sleep improved. So did my focus. My days felt lighter without the constant anticipation of being asked to carry someone else's mistake. I stopped rehearsing explanations in my head. Stopped preparing to be misunderstood. One afternoon, I cleaned out my bag. I found the faint crease where the envelope had rested for seconds before I moved it. I threw the bag away and bought a new one. Not as a statement. As a reset. I didn't win anything that night at the restaurant. I didn't expose anyone publicly. I didn't deliver a lesson. I simply refused to be used as a container. Peace didn't come from reconciliation. It came from alignment. I still love my family. That didn't disappear. But love no longer meant silence at my expense or responsibility without consent. When I think back on that dinner now, I don't remember the police lights or the tension. I remember the moment I chose not to carry what wasn't mine. That choice didn't end the story. It finally made it honest. And that was enough to move forward, quietly, without looking back.